The MeidasTouch network has Donald Trump panicking as we are pursuing the truth about his dark past, and a federal judge just instantly issued an order in connection with a lawsuit filed against the Trump regime by MeidasTouch host Katie Phang. MeidasTouch host Katie Phang filed the first of its kind lawsuit seeking immediate relief to release the Epstein files under the Epstein Transparency Act. This was the first major private lawsuit filed by a member of the media to get the Epstein documents that are still being withheld, which may be as many as 5, 10, 15, 20 million documents being concealed by the Trump regime under the Epstein Transparency Act's requirement that these documents be turned over 30 days from back in December. So Katie Phang filed this lawsuit. We named Todd Blanche as a defendant. The Trump regime named as a defendant. It was filed in Washington, D.C. federal court. And then instantly a federal judge issued an order holding the Trump regime's feet to the fire and demanding that the Trump regime immediately respond. By the way, make sure you hit subscribe to our YouTube channel here at the MeidasTouch Network, where we don't just talk the talk, we walk the walk. And make sure you subscribe here, but also subscribe to Katie Phang's YouTube channel. It's such an honor to have Katie Phang be a part of this network, showing the fearlessness you all know and love about Katie Phang. Search Katie Phang on YouTube and subscribe to her YouTube channel and tell her that Ben sent you over there. So Katie Phang filed this lawsuit against the Trump regime back on April 27, 2026. But just the other day, she moved for a preliminary injunction. In other words, she's asking the judge now on an emergency basis, especially as we see Pam Bondi's despicable behavior during her meeting with the House Oversight Committee, where she just said everything is Todd Blanche's fault, and she refused to answer any questions about her conversations with Donald Trump or what Trump told her about covering up this child sex trafficking ring. She refused to answer those questions. So Katie Phang's like, look, enough is enough with all of this. We saw Howard Lutnick's scam where he didn't testify under oath and didn't testify on video, but did an informal meeting. You had Pam Bondi showed up on Friday, informal meeting. We all know there are millions and millions of Epstein documents, the worst of the worst documents, even worse than what's been released already, being concealed by these predators, the Epstein class and the Trump regime. Katie Phang files the lawsuit. Then on Thursday, she seeks an emergency injunction. On Friday, we get an order from the federal judge, and the federal judge rules as follows. Defendant's opposition brief, meaning Trump, has to respond to us by June 5th, 2026. And the plaintiff reply brief will be due June 8th, 2026. A hearing will now be taking place June 16th, 2026 at 11 a.m. in courtroom 24A in person before Judge Emmett G. Sullivan. Here's the application that Katie Phang followed. Plaintiff's application for a preliminary injunction. Plaintiff Katie Phang moves the court for a preliminary injunction requiring defendant Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general of the United States, to cure several instances of non-compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Specifically, she requested that the names that were redacted of the perps, the perpetrators, the pedos, the people who are being covered up, those names need to be released immediately, and the files that are being withheld need to be produced immediately. Here's what Katie Phang wrote. The Epstein Files Transparency Act requires the Attorney General to produce, with a few exceptions, all files in the Department of Justice's possession related to Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, their networks, and their crimes. Defendant Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, has flouted Congress's directives and the act's unambiguous commands. Among other deficiencies, Blanche has redacted the names of Epstein's friends, associates, and potential co-conspirators, withheld documents implicating his own boss, Donald Trump, in alleged crimes, and invoked exceptions to the disclosure that Congress never authorized. Plaintiff, Katie Phang, is an independent journalist, by the way, with the MeidasTouch network, who has covered Epstein, his network, and his victims for many years. In the past year alone, Phang has published 72 videos about Epstein, Maxwell, and the Epstein files. Phang relies on materials disclosed under the Act to report on many of her stories, so Blanche's flagrant violations of the Act made it much harder for Phang to do her job. Phang brought this case to obtain a comprehensive remedy for Blanche's unlawful conduct. To that end, Phang intends to ask the court to appoint a special master to oversee Blanche's overall compliance with the Act. When the nation's chief law enforcement officer persists in violating the plain letter of the law, ongoing judicial oversight is the only cure. For the moment, however, Phang seeks only to redress the irreparable injuries that she, fellow journalists, and Epstein victims are suffering because of Blanche's most egregious violations, brazen violations of the Act. And so she's requesting this injunction right here that will remove the redactions of the perpetrators and the co-conspirators. And she wants Blanche to produce the set of illegally withheld documents from the FBI investigation into allegations regarding Donald Trump. And she wants to unredact the names of, in addition to the co-conspirators, to promptly publish to the Federal Register a redaction log about why these documents are being withheld and the documents that are being withheld. Phang satisfies the requirements to obtain such relief. Blanche's violations of the Act are obvious, and Phang accordingly is likely to prevail on the merits of her claims. Blanche's illegal acts are causing Phang, an investigative journalist covering the Epstein story, an injury and a loss, creating Article 3 standing. And here's just additional facts from her complaint right here, which talks about how the Act required the Attorney General to produce, with very limited and precisely enumerated exceptions, all documents held by the Department of Justice or the Federal Bureau of Investigation concerning Epstein. They were due within 30 days of its enactment or no later than December 19, 2025, and those documents are being unlawfully withheld.
Magic Spoon has figured out how to turn treats into something you could actually feel great about eating. If you're like me and you love having something sweet during the day or after dinner, but you don't want the sugar crash, this is going to be your new obsession. Their Magic Spoon treats are crispy, airy snack bars that taste like dessert, but they have the macros of a protein bar: 12 grams of protein, 7 grams of fiber, 0 grams of added sugar, and they're certified gluten-free. They come in flavors like marshmallow, chocolate peanut butter, and double chocolate. They're perfect to toss in your bag, keep in the car, or grab when that sweet craving hits. And of course, Magic Spoon cereal is still iconic. You know I love it. All the childhood nostalgia you remember, with 12 to 14 grams of protein and between 0 to 2 grams of sugar per serving. Fruity, frosted, cinnamon crunch, cocoa, peanut butter. They've got all the classics, and I truthfully love them all. Magic Spoon is easy to find. Just look for Magic Spoon at your local grocery store, and they just rolled out treats nationwide at 7-Eleven. And if you haven't tried them yet, check out Magic Spoon's new protein pastries, a high-protein, low-sugar take on the classic toaster pastries you grew up with. You can get $5 off your next order, including the protein pastries, at magicspoon.com/Meidas. That's magicspoon.com/Meidas, MEIDAS, for $5 off.
Now, we're going to wait for the hearing that we've got. And remember, make sure you all subscribe to Katie Phang's YouTube channel. But that hearing will now be taking place June 16, 2026. What we expect the Department of Justice to argue is what they argued when Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie sought a special master. We believe the Department of Justice is going to say the Epstein Transparency Act provides no cause of action or no remedy, and nobody can do anything. It's what they've argued before. So we'll see if they argue it here, now that this is the first private lawsuit of its kind that's being brought. But I think that will be very revealing and show you the cover-up that's taking place. But an instant order, an instant response by the federal judge. The Trump regime is going to have to respond. Now, I also want to share this with you because this video is really not out there at all. This was James Comer, the MAGA Republican chair of the House Oversight Committee. And here's what he said on Friday when Pam Bondi was involved in the massive cover-up. Here's how he tried to spin it. Let's play this clip.
Hello, I want to thank everyone for being here today. This will be our 13th interview thus far in the Epstein investigation. We'll be having former Attorney General Pam Bondi. This is the second time she's come voluntarily. She came a few months ago for a briefing. Unfortunately, the Democrats got up and walked out of that briefing. Many of the Republicans asked her questions for a couple of hours during that briefing, and I appreciate that she's coming back today voluntarily for a transcribed interview.
Now, notably as well, James Comer was asked, and there was actually survivors there as well, and they were asking questions also. And they were asking questions about the documents being withheld, and also, why did you allow Pam Bondi to not testify under oath and not under a video camera? And why are you saying it's voluntary when she was subpoenaed? Watch what Comer had to say right here.
Mr. Chairman, there are documents that still have not been released.
Well, that's what we're going to ask about today, and we asked about that in the briefing. And at the time, what if I remember correctly, what the Attorney General said, the former Attorney General, was that they had turned over all the documents that they can legally turn over. Now, we're going to find out. Those are the questions that we're going to have. We're going to go to the first hour. What documents remain? Why haven't they been turned over? We're going to try to determine whether or not there could be more documents legally turned over. I want every document. I don't want anything held back. And I think the majority of the committee is the same way.
Does that answer satisfy you, though, if some documents are still always withheld?
Well, I don't know. We're going to find out, and we'll come out and tell you what she said. We'll release all the transcripts, and if anyone is lying to Congress, that's a felony. So,
Mr. Chairman, I think this was voluntary when she was subpoenaed. Why are you describing it as voluntary after the subpoena?
She's coming in. She didn't do like the Clintons and take 7 months to come in. I mean, this is, she could have fought it. She could have fought it.
And more from James Comer over here, where he says the government has failed the survivors. The government has failed the survivors. Now he goes, not just Trump, but Trump failed the survivors and the government failed the survivors. Well, if that's the case, then hold the government accountable and hold the former government officials accountable. Make sure Pam Bondi goes under oath and is filmed. Don't give her an exception that everybody else has to follow. Here, play this clip.
This case hasn't been thoroughly investigated. I think that's one thing that we all can see. When I subpoenaed the estate, I believe with all my heart some of the estate documents that we made public. We made 100% of the estate documents public. I believe that there were many in the Department of Justice had never seen many of those documents that were in the estate. And I believe that people that had been looking at the estate had never seen any of the documents that the Department of Justice had. I believe there are documents that New Mexico officials had never seen that were in the Southern District of New York. I believe there were documents that were in Palm Beach that they had never seen in New York. So what we're trying to do is just connect all the dots and see if there is a way to hold people accountable. Remember, many of these crimes happened 20 plus years ago. We're going to do everything in our ability to hold people accountable and try to understand how the government failed. But they did. They failed. There's no question. It's not just this administration. It goes back several administrations. So we're going to do everything in our ability to try to get justice for the victim.
And now contrast that to how Democratic Congressmember Robert Garcia responded. Here's what he had to say. Play this clip.
I just want to be very clear that we continue to be incredibly disappointed of the decision to not have this interview videotaped and then released to the American public. The second thing we asked Chairman Comer is to ensure that this interview is under oath. We understand the Attorney General is going to be there answering questions from Congress, but it should have been under oath and it should be videotaped. We obviously have a lot of questions as it relates to why only 50% of the files have been released, why many of the survivors were literally put in danger by the way the files were released, that private information should never have been released, and of course, why this continues to be some type of cover-up. And so those are our questions. There's many questions. We'll be here for the next few hours, but it's really important that we get to the truth and that the Attorney General answers the questions truthfully And we'll continue to push, of course, for a videotape release transcript for everybody else.
More from Congressman Garcia here.
It's also interesting that sitting next to her is DOJ counsel, somebody that currently works for the Department of Justice, who on multiple occasions stepped in and told the former Attorney General that she was not going to answer those questions, and especially when we asked questions of what the president directed her to do. And so the DOJ is in there right now stopping questions about President Trump and about what happened in the release of these files and why so many survivors were doxxed and their information, of course, released to the public. And let me also just say, finally, before I turn this over to Liz, to Ms. Stein here, we asked questions about Ghislaine Maxwell and the transfer. And again, she referred those questions to Todd Blanche in the Bureau of Prisons. So let's be clear, we have many questions for Mr. Blanche and for the Bureau of Prisons that yet Republicans are refusing to ask. Why was she transferred to a less secure facility? And Ms. Bondi claims to have no knowledge of the actual transfer, no knowledge that it was a less secure prison, and didn't know about it until she found out after the fact, and then will refuse to answer additional questions. So let me.
And finally, here's what Garcia said as well. Let's play this clip.
It is clear in just this part of the interview that she continues to push all of the investigation and the blame on acting AG Todd Blanche. She said, and I quote, "Acting AG Blanche was managing the entire investigation," end quote. And what you're going to hear in that interview and what she's saying here in her words and remarks is that it was Todd Blanche, the current acting AG, that was leading the Epstein investigation. And quite frankly, all of the mistakes that we saw, the redactions, not protecting survivors, she continues to push that back onto the acting AG, Todd Blanche, who, by the way, was Donald Trump's former personal lawyer.
So we need transparency, and I'm proud that the MeidasTouch Network host Katie Phang is on the front lines of filing that lawsuit. Let me know what you think. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers, and thank you all for watching. We appreciate you all so much. Great work, Katie Phang. Subscribe to Katie Phang's YouTube channel.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to add the MeidasTouch podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts for new updates every single day.